in this room, we're going to have a discussion on the subject of globalism. Globalism or protectionism. Participating in this discussion are the individuals that you see in front of you. They each have their own microphones. We have the topic shown on the agenda. The questions have been prepared. It doesn't mean that the participants cannot digress and discuss other adjacent issues. Of course, it's a multifaceted issue, and you do not have to only talk about those issues that are mentioned in the agenda. But for a start, I would take upon myself the opportunity to say a couple of introductory words. One probably shouldn't juxtapose globalism and protectionism. Why do I think so? Globalization is a process that has been going on for at least 3 decades, or maybe even longer. And it's about strengthening the interdependence between the various nations in the world. And as part of this intensification of exchange of goods and services and capital, which is also compounded by the expansion of and the diffusion of technologies, and also accompanied by advancements in the areas of science and technology, and primarily in the area of information. And as many studies have shown, globalization should theoretically result in building on our planet a fairly homogeneous economic environment, and in building a single uniform economic system that would be essentially dictating its participants its own rules. And protectionism is something that's quite different. It's a type of trade and economic policy pursued by a state. The alternative to this trade policy is freedom of trade. Not a single country in the world has been pursuing either type of the trade policy. There are no such nations in the world. All countries in the world manifest elements of both protectionism and free trade. Speaking about protectionism, I would like to say that today's protectionism is much more modest than the protectionism that existed in the world after the end of the Great Depression and the end of World War II. Back then, the leading nations in the world had high tariffs, 20, 30%, and sometimes 40% for goods and services crossing borders. Today, protectionism is more moderate in nature. For the last 20 years, at WTO's assessment, the average level of customs duties and tariffs for imports is 15% lower, is about 9% on average. And it is for that reason. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that in addition to using and applying such tariff restrictions, many countries use non-tariff measures. They use both tariff and non-tariff measures, and this is all built into a bilateral, multilateral trade agreement during the Uruguay round in 1994. So what follows from all of this is that right now the situation in the world economy in general and in specific countries in particular is such that without the use of protectionist measures, not a single country can go on about its business, because there are some sensitive sectors in those economies that these countries are forced to protect and defend against foreign competitors. What the WTO stresses is that protectionism is getting stronger. They do pay attention to that, of course. They noted that in the global crisis in 2008 and 2009, and since then they've been stressing that at every conference that they have conducted, the ministerial meetings of the WTO members. And they've done this at all summits of the G20. They mentioned this as well. WTO has been monitoring the use of various of those measures by various nations in the world.
And the results of this monitoring can prove once again that since the beginning of the global crisis and until the end of 2016, only G20 countries used 670 limiting measures, and these limiting measures covered around 5% of the global import. But on the other hand, we should also say that most of these measures, including the increase of customs duties until the binding level or the market protection measures, technical barriers, some sanitary or other measures, they were imposed not counter or against the WTO rules, but based on these WTO rules, which are currently stipulated in international trade treaties. So most of the limitations were legal in terms of international law. And it is confirmed by figures from WTO for the same period of time. So since the beginning of the crisis and until 2016, so the dispute body of WTO got only 149 submissions about the breaches from different countries. So in this case, only 12% of these limiting measures were questioned. So the modern protectionism has a legal character, and as I said, this is quite sure if we compare to what it was 70 years ago. And as for other issues, I don't want to speak right now. I just would like to leave a space for discussion. And also like to ask our panelists to express their opinions to these issues we pointed out in our agenda. And I think that the 8th of March, the International Women's Day, was long ago, but when we were celebrating it, it is a very good day, and many men sat from the TV screens that the ambience of the 8th of March lived every single day for them. So, because we had most of the panelists are male, and we have only one woman, that's why it would be correct to give the first floor to Daria Ushkalova. Thank you, Vladimir, for this opportunity to express my opinion in the first, and I can also give you a joke about the field of mines when the woman goes first. But actually, the gentlemen do not really dispute about the facts. It is more important to agree upon the definitions. And I would like to continue what Vladimir just said. We need to understand what we mean when we say protectionism or globalism. When we talk about the protectionism which we had in 1920s, 1950s, the modern protectionism is a targeted one, is selective. And the tools of this protectionism are not only the classic trade, international trade measures, but also the whole set of other tools. And in this case, we really consider the protectionism as measures providing better conditions for domestic businesses and even for those who actually do business in a particular country. So probably all the whole economic a set of economic tools can be considered as protecting or limiting measures. We talk about the tax policy or financing policy and so on. And in this case, we shouldn't actually limit the protectionism only with the tax customs duties. But we also know that all countries are using the protectionism in everything what we know are the definition of competition of jurisdictions. That's also an element of protectionism, and it is absolutely clear that the government shouldn't leave this playing field. And there is protectionism not only in the domestic market but also in international markets. And if we look at the experience of many successful companies from the countries with the developing markets, we can also see the governmental support, for example, for the Korean or Chinese companies. But as for the globalism, it is more complicated. What do we understand now under the globalism? Because there is no protections for the free trade, also there is no globalism in the world. What is the globalism? Somebody understands a free global trade. So in this case, actually, the World WTO is actually not the result of this globalism. But if you look at the process for treaty preparation, I'm talking about the WTO Treaty Plus, we can all see the very significant differentiation. And now globalism is understood now as an absolutely different process. That's a process of building global partnerships. And in this context, these multi-level initiatives which are aimed at a liberalization and a cooperation in different areas, and they actually are serving these particular targets. And they create positive conditions inside and can leave those countries outside which are not participating. If we look at this globalism in this context, there is no contradiction at all. And the question is very easy. How should we live in this world? How should we position our own country? How should we run our economic policy within this challenging context? And there are only two questions. Can we support and what support measures can we use? The other question is, I would compare the modern protectionism with the sport. For example, there is a ski national team, but there are also servicemen. They're responsible for greasing the skis. It is actually has no sense to grease the skis for the sportsman who can be only 100, 301st, but it's actually much better to grease the ski for the guy who can be even number one. But as I'm currently also looking at a trend at increasing the competition level in the global trade, and the protective measures will be still used. But if you look at the current system, it will certainly will be shaking. Let's have a look what's happening between the United States and China now. I don't really understand how it is supposed to keep developing in the future because the United States imposed the import uh, duties for the steel, and the China China also imposed its own customs duties, but the WTO didn't allow them to do it. Actually, the China stopped acting those uh, preferences which China made for the United States when the United States joined the WTO. Now, even the WTO members are allowed not to fulfill the conditions they agreed to, and I think this trend will continue. And I would like to add something to what Daria said. I didn't say in the beginning that we started a very critical time period, not only we, but also the global trade system. This is something what Daria is talking about. Well, now we do are facing an open trade war between the United States and China. Certainly, both countries violate rules of WTO, and those obligations the countries take over, and well, this is actually the breach of and violence of those obligations taken by the United States and China. China and Russia already declared at the meeting of the W Trade Council that China and Russia will file a claim to WTO. The WTO rules were breached by the United States. And the situation is really acute in what can be the consequences, and the consequences can be that it can start a chain reaction that because the increase of the U.S. customs duties is touched not only China but also South Korea, Russia, and EU, and probably the other countries may follow the Chinese experience, and in this case, those columns of the international trade which we have been built within the last 70 years can be destroyed. We can see massive trade wars. What is going to be the result? A nightmare. I think every single country will suffer in economic terms if these kind of wars start. This is just a small remark to what Daria said. Now I'd like to give the floor to the man, Anatoly Wasserman. You are welcome. Unfortunately, the panelist speaks off the mic.
Извините. Если позволите, я попробую объяснить,
I
почему
will
наша
try to understand why
движение
no
протекционизма
nightmare is gonna happen and why the protectionism of every single country is helpful and useful for the whole mankind.
многочисленных
First of
лидеров
all, I
и
understand
художников,
that
юристы
the
достаточно изобретательны,
lawyers
чтобы
are really
ущербность
clever enough
исключения из
in
правил
order
можно было
to
признать легальной.
acknowledge legal many of the WTO rules exceptions, and I also sure that biggest part of these limitations and restrictions are also legal because they are approved by the nations of those countries who are remembering the WTO. And why these limitations and restrictions are useful? to the biggest part, because many economic theories which are also underlying the WTO treaty are based on a good thing of the freedom of individuals without taking into account the society. So these theories are depriving them of themselves of using those benefits created by the society, because every it is already proven that every new level of system can also use the links from the levels below. And now we have been knowing for the last 3,000 years the improvement of the labor efficiency when this labor is divided more. Now the economic theory take it as something what doesn't change without any analysis of the labor efficiency growth and without understanding any limitations or restrictions for this particular labor efficiency growth. So the current global labor division foresees that every single country should get focus on the areas where this country is the best one, and the rest should be purchased from other countries in exchange for the products manufactured domestically. But the country is a very complicated structure in order to limit just with several areas of business. Margaret Thatcher said if the Soviet Union limited itself with the oil and gas export, so its population would amount to 15 million people. We actually said it as something very bloody, but it was actually a warning from her not to follow her experience, not to limit the whole industry in the country only with several areas. And she also managed to study not only positive but also negative consequences of her decision. As the result of this non understanding of reasons for the labor efficiency growth, we came to this economic paradox: the labor efficiency per one working capital is going up, but the labor efficiency per one living human being is going down, because the current labor division system came to the situation that the biggest part of the living people stopped working. And in order to restore the classic system of labor separation, when every single country can do everything what it can, and can procure from the others something what it not able to do at all. That's why we need to remind the authors of the WTO that the legal laws are created by people and the laws are changed by people when they see that the laws were wrong. Why do we need this protectionism and not only the self-development of different industries? Because there is such a case which is known as the commercial or business and eternity. Sometimes a certain development may be so popular, and if we get something more innovative, we see that the previous development got so many investments, so it is very difficult to get rid of it. And the further use of this particular development will also stop us to invest and to develop something more innovative. We also do see a lot of industries destroyed by the current globalization format. So many countries will use the protectionism, first of all, in the accounting terms of view. It is not really beneficial, because if you would like to develop a new industry, you have to spend a lot of money without a solid, firm guarantee of payback. But this money will stay within the economy, and they will work as a drive for all the parts of your economy. And as for the globalization, probably 17 or 16 years ago, I published an article, Globalization is a Diversity, where I showed that the globalization can be useful only in the case when we don't pave the whole earth with the asphalt of the same color, but when it gives to the manufacturers and access to the whole diversity of consumers, and all provides all the consumers with the access to the whole diversity of all the manufacturers, because this particular labor separation in upon the many different needs of peoples in the world, this format can guarantee the highest increase of the labor efficiency, because other formats of the labor separation we used are very close to extinction, and they are not probably able to improve themselves at the current technological level. But if we talk about the labor separation upon the diversity of needs, is actually really far from extinction. And I hope that if we get an opportunity in a couple of years here, the technical opportunity to manage the whole global production as one single thing, and it shouldn't be an incentive to shrink the diversity of needs. I think this point of view is interesting. You have something you can think about. Who is going to be the next one? Mark Chernov. I think this discussion is going not in the right direction, because the format we use here should let us discuss more tangible things. We shouldn't actually talk about the super complicated conceptions with these super complicated definitions. And actually, we also don't need to discuss the WTO. I would like to actually focus on a problem which is actually more acute. There is Russia with its problems, and there is the world, and there is the globalization in terms of very fast increase of information, product, and people exchange. So how should we do without a very, very outdated economy? Because our economy is very outdated, and the experts say that 70% of all our equipment and machines and technologies are already outdated. The official statistics say about 50%. As if we talk about the labor resources, they are actually of poor quality. The labor and working ethics is also very low. And how should we be in these conditions? And what do we want? Would we like to stay as the kind of under the educated and underdeveloped and to be a third world country, or do we want to be within the developed world? Do we really want to resolve our economic and social problems? Do we really want to get enough money to invest into the education and into the medicine, the medical sector? Because medicine is not really functioning now, but we shouldn't actually deal with these idiotic theories of communism, North Korean communism. I think we should be focused on the openness, because I think that the only thing which can really save this self-reproducing economic culture of the third world, which we started entering now, that is the inflow of high-quality foreign investments. Probably this is just a bullshit or not a bullshit, I don't know. It could be someone else's shit, not a bullshit. You don't need to comment on it. Please don't say it aloud. But do we have debates or not? Let's debate and don't pour water, because let's give a chance to bring the idea to the end. But I think this something what he is saying is abusing for me. Everyone has an opportunity to respond on this particular thing, on everything what is said. Let's be more tolerant and show respect to each other, because that is the main ground of every discussion, the mutual respect. And if we really would like to become a part of the developed world, we need foreign investments, which will also bring new technologies, the new management culture. It doesn't mean that the government shouldn't do anything. We need certain management or governing system here, but the main setup is what are we doing? We are currently protesting our outdated industries, or we as a Japan after World War II will do our best in order to take over the international experience, in order to break through. And I think everything what I say may actually wake up a very angry reaction. You are also have a right to express his own opinion. I expressed my opinion. You can accept it, you can disaccept it, but I didn't come here to persuade you in anything, because this kind of discussions, they shouldn't persuade anyone. But a declaration that this particular sentence is abusing for me, that's not a discussion for the round table. That's why I'm finalizing my speech. I said my word, I am happy. Now it's your turn. I represent the Ralph Ringer company. My name is Andrei Berezhnev. We are a shoemaker, a Russian shoemaker. I would like.
Anatoly Wasserman tried to explain to the audience that globalization, which unites the resources of the entire mankind for the purpose of satisfying needs, is only good when you know in advance who are the beneficiaries. It is clear that in this case it's the entire mankind. Otherwise, it's not for that satisfaction of the needs of the people, but rather to satisfy the needs of those that manage the process, period. Secondly, As far as protectionism is concerned, any talk about the need to invest or have investments coming in, and in order to make that happen, to open the economy, is nothing more than just empty talk. Let me give you a good example. It was mentioned that Japan produces a lot today. It was an open economy after World War II, but we know that in Russia, the customs duty on shoes, when you try to import something, is €1 on a pair of imported shoes. That's what we signed when we joined the WTO. In Japan, if you want to import there, it's 25%. €1 is something that's about 2 to 3% of the price of what you wear here. In Japan, it's 25. What I'm driving at is that definitely the internal market that produces, that provides people with jobs, educating people, is the market, which is the end goal. The purpose is to provide people with an opportunity to work in a creative fashion in various industries, mixed industries, with varying degrees of productivity, because every person is different. And in order to produce that, you need to even or level out the real cost of production in the country with the cost of production that are borne by our global competitors. If the real costs are different, there will be no real production in the country, even if you bring umps of equipment and technology. So the cost should be equivalent. If we're talking about honest competition and competitiveness, that means that the duties should be more or less the same. 3%, rather €1 is the import duty in our country. In Iran, they've lifted the sanctions, and I thought the country wanted a good product, and I wanted to write them a letter suggesting that we want to sell them shoes. The answer of the ambassador was 75%. In India, it's close to 100%. In Brazil, they produced 500 million pairs, and the duty is close to 100%. That's different from 80 million in Russia. So many countries are really well protected with the tariffs and duties, and these are the conditions under which we try to find ourselves a place in the global market. The European and the American markets are not really that well protected by the duties, but this is where a highly organized retail business is ruling the markets, and it's really difficult to compete with them. Because they buy everything in China and India, where the cost of production is much lower. So without the protection of the internal market by some kind of compensatory import duties, it would be difficult to develop your production, your industry. So the question arises, do we want to produce shoes? No, if we don't, then we're going to be importing everything. If we do want to, if you want to produce something else, just tell us what you want us to produce. But we cannot just sit here and wait for investment. We have been sitting for the investments to come for 25 years. That's my point of view. It's also quite interesting as a point of view. If I may, I'd like to offer two comments regarding what's been said. Leveling out the conditions. It's €1 here, it's 25% in Japan. These are different countries, and the internal domestic prices are different. The principle of calculation is the key stone here. And the principle is as follows. You take the internal price and you compare that price with the external price. The difference between those prices is the size of the duty. The second point, the second comment I wanted to offer, let's increase the import from €1 to 10. Over the last 3 years, and again, speaking about import duties, our producers are saying that they've reduced the import duties that's hampering our efforts. We hear that quite often. But they omit to say that 3 years ago we switched from the targeted inflation to the floating exchange rate, and the exchange rate grew by a factor of 2. Now it's a little bit less than then. I'm comparing with the end of 2014. It's not 2 times, but it's 1.8 times. But what does this devaluation of the local currency means by a factor of 2? That means an increase of the import duty by 100%. Shall we do it again? Then we can work. That's what I would like to say. And I never hear such responses from our producers. If you wanted to argue against this, you will have an opportunity later on. Alexei Partansky, please go ahead. Thank you. At the very beginning, I would like to very quickly respond to what my colleague said. The issues of his industry are quite valid, but those issues do not lend themselves to generalizations. I think one needs to be careful about this, but at the same time, such problems, they should be written down, and they have to be directed to the Ministry of Industry and Trade or to the Ministry of Economic Development, because that's exactly what you should be concerned with. But when Russia decided to join in with the WTO, all of the industry representatives were heard. And secondly, those conditions were formed in a very comprehensive way. I wanted to come back to the main thrust of this discussion, which is globalization, protectionism, and the relationship between the two. We are talking about economic globalization because there is also the cultural globalization and other types of it. And the very first globalizers were Jesus Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, and the economic globalization, as some people think, some scientists think, or most of them think, started in 1980, and it's really the main path forward for most of the economies. And those that stood on the path of globalization really reached high levels of development. Some countries of the Eastern Asia, some countries in Latin America. Let's take such a country as Costa Rica. I'm sure every second person outside can tell you they probably produce bananas and coffee. Not at all. This is the country that, thanks to liberalization and thanks to the inclusion in the World Division of Labor, was able to achieve very good results, highest results in terms of healthcare, education. And in many of these fields, they are at #1 spot in Latin America and at very high spots worldwide. That's what globalization has given them. The other matter I would like to mention for the sake of time is that today the United States, that had been for the major portion of the 20th century been the leaders of the international economy, international trade negotiations, are under President Trump changing radically and drastically their role, and that is having a tremendous influence on the entire global economy in the entire world, because the inertia is really high, and the United States are still the most powerful country, despite China's incursions and its production levels. But the U.S. is still the most powerful economy. Let's take the stock market. Not a single country in the world can, in the nearest future, at least theoretically, reach that same level of the stock market that the United States possesses today. Why do other countries want to go to the U.S. market? Because this is the most interesting market. It's the most profitable market. And Since Trump moved to the White House, Washington started changing its policies. And Trump, trying to fulfill his election promises or campaign promises that were quite naive and really too far-reaching, started to impose protectionist measures, trying to close America down, trying to restore America back to greatness. And we can see today that all of that is not really working for them. And you need to follow through on your promises. And we don't see that it's going to really work. Though, as of now, the U.S. have really strained its relations with its neighbors. We can also raise this subject of its dispute with China. A major investigation got started in August on intellectual property. It's going to continue for 1 year, for the whole year. In autumn, certain measures were taken against Canada. In civil engineering, the tariffs of 20% were introduced against their nearest neighbor. There is the current drive to impose tariffs on steel and other metals for many countries, and China has been affected to a lesser degree, but Brazil and South Korea and Europe were at the forefront of this. So all of this taken together is a cause for frustration, confusion, and I wouldn't rule out a collective suit similar to the one that was filed in 2003 when we were still not a member of the WTO, when the United States raised drastically the steel tariffs. But they had a very pragmatic goal at the time. They needed to change their steel industry, which was lagging behind. They wanted to do this, and while others complained, they would restructure it very quickly. Of course, there were some complaints. We didn't have the opportunity to do that because we were not members of the WTO, but China and Europe and India did. And for 6 months, they were in arguments. They then returned to the status quo before that, but they've been able to restructure their industry. Now they are shooting for even loftier goals. They say that if there are rules on the world markets, those rules have led to the growth of the U.S. trade deficit of $800 billion. Out of those, $350 billion are apportioned to China. That's certainly a challenge. Why would they need such rules, they say? And if others follow suit after the United States would start renege on their commitment to those rules, then we would see chaos ensuing. But as of today, one wouldn't say that they have thrown those rules away. That hasn't happened yet, but it may happen. Another point I wanted to drive home is that this type of behavior under President Trump is something that has prompted a very unexpected move from Beijing. At Davos 2018, Chairman Xi Jinping really turned things over, because in his speech he criticized the protectionism of the Washington, and he said that this will lead to trade wars and that nobody would benefit from. And at least declaration-wise, it turns out that the main globalist right now is China, at least becoming one. Another thing I would like to say, I have to do this in broad brushstrokes, is that almost all of Washington's partners are in disagreement with these new policies. I can give you some specific examples of that. Following Trump's pulling out of the Pacific Partnership, Asian-Pacific Partnership, and after the agreement between Canada and the European Union, CETA, was signed, another agreement may be signed, which would be a comprehensive economic partnership in the Asian region, with the potential of half of the population of the world and close to half of the GDP of the world. Japan and the European Union have announced their initiative to build their own partnership. So, in summary, the US's leading partners, seeing this new behavior under Trump, are trying to use every method they can in order to maintain this trend towards further globalization and opening up of the markets. But of course, the power of the US economy suggests everyone to look back at the United States and look up to it. And this is something that hasn't yet allowed these new tendencies to set in, or at least to get finalized. But the response is very straightforward, very clear. This new US protectionism, which is embodied by Trump, ended up being unacceptable by most nations of the world and the US leading partners. I would stop here right now. If we look at the program and look at the questions for discussion that we've identified there, I would say that I have to mention that everyone that has spoken so far have already moved into another direction. Of course, we live in Russia, and as such, we ought to think about how we should live further under the current situation that is now folding everywhere in the world. Because Trump is not just threatening with things. He's saying that WTO is a catastrophe. If necessary, we will pull out of it. And then there could be a chain reaction following that. Again, let me say that that system of rules that exists, that world order, with all its deficiencies, and the way it regulates world trade, is a system of rules. And the WTO documents say it's a codex of behavior of governments and countries, members of the WTO, in regulating their foreign trade. So if this all falls apart, then chaos is inevitable, and I would like to support what Alexei said about this. But we have one more speaker, and then afterwards we may open the floor for questions and comments from the audience and continue our discussion in that fashion. There's going to be a general discussion, and then you would be able to address a question to everyone who speaks here. I have a question to my opponents. Did you ever do any production? Did you ever produce anything in your life? And intellectual products you've forgotten about. Intellectual products. So that means nothing. Well, you should really shit your pants now. You wanted an answer, I gave you an answer. I can see really what. I'll ask you about the product. Did you produce steel? Where did you work? Well, let's stop this. You're talking about Mordashov, the one who lobbied the entrance into the WTO. Let us be civil. Let us stop this arguing and fighting. It's senseless. What is? We have a problem. Let me speak. I will probably leave this company to hell because I'm really fed and tired with you. Let's go from here. You either leave or go back. Let's not pay attention to this. Let's not pay attention to this gesture. Dear Professor Chernov, he works at the highest school of economics, and that is why his arguments are not his own, and therefore you should never attack the person. That is the general program of the School of Economics, which is to completely eliminate the economy. You need to decide whether you're leaving or whether you are going to continue in the discussion. I would like to ask the participants of the discussion, we shouldn't really try to mimic what we see every day on television, and I'm afraid we're going to start fighting. I just asked a question. Let me speak, because I came here from the village. Okay, no prefaces, just start speaking. My name is Alexei Putin. I produce cheese. I milk cows, and I grow livestock. I used to be an office person. I was doing this intellectual work. And then I started the real production when sanctions were slapped against Russia, and we answered with counter-sanctions. And in my childhood, I was observing the agriculture to die in the rural area. That was one of the worst memories of my childhood. But I was looking at the death of my people, and I left. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Can I ask you a question? I've never interrupted anyone, but you're interrupting me. But let me ask you, as you are speaking, they've given you money. This started after we joined the WTO. Was it before that? Well, let me explain. Our country wasn't protected in any way, and things were brought into the country without any. I'm not going to bite you. You can stand next to me. I will be standing here at the corner. I'm afraid that I'm confusing you. So, things were not profitable to be produced in our country, including cheese. I know from my German colleagues, and I know that my German colleagues would receive 300, 400, 500 euros in subsidies. They would also get subsidies for milk. They also have a lot of hidden subsidies that do not meet any requirements of the WTO, such as subsidies for electricity, which they sell to themselves. And so in Russia, to produce dairy products and cheeses were unprofitable things prior to the slapping of the sanctions. But we've been able to increase our production by 10% over 3 years, and in the general economy it's about 3 to 4%. So I'm not the only one like that. We have several cheesemakers like that. And speaking about the investments, I would like to say the largest investors in the dairy and livestock husbandry are Germans. They are building most than anyone else. And Deutsche Milchkantor is the biggest dairy product, and they also buy cheesemakers in Voronezh. Italians are also quite strong. They come into Moscow region and buy and build their own cheese-making facilities. In Krasnodar, they're building a facility to produce millions of products, and there are 3 of such facilities in the whole of Germany. So I can see that this industry is growing. And this has created prerequisites for protectionism. When we stopped the importation of produce, it had been growing until recently, but today we saw a dip in the market, because our brothers from Belarus were bringing in cheaper dairy products from the European Union, which were known and notorious for driving their costs down. And Danone and Pepsi, they collapsed our market with a lot of milk, and farmers in Sverdlovsk and in the Volga district have to spill out their milk because it started costing 116 rubles. And I saw how the agriculture is dying. This is very similar to how we've lost hundreds and thousands of our villages and thousands of our fellow citizens. So to us, the questions of globalism and protectionism sounds like survival or death. Of course, I'm for globalism. I want our market to be protected and their markets open for us. If we had an import duty of 300% for the Italian Parmigiano cheese, that would be great. But we have such protection for vegetables. In Europe, the import duty for Russian vegetables is 300%, but in the case of cheese, they say it's an open market, come and trade. I will be able to sell my products there quality-wise, but for half a year, I've been trying to get some documents to import into the European Union, and that is because the German market is so well protected by the sanitation authorities, by their Surgeon General services. Yeah, they are protecting their market in any each way they can, and if they start bringing out products, then the German farmers will go on strike, and Merkel will stop it all. In Russia, speaking about protectionism, this is something that has allowed us to increase the outputs of our agricultural machine building industry. We're starting producing more tractors and combines. And agriculture is growing, and we have now producers of equipment for cheese making. They came to the industry together with me, and now they're making 400 to 800 sets of equipment in Russia. Well, it's not really something that merits a discussion, globalism versus protectionism. And nobody is banning them from bringing in foreign investment.
If you allow me, I can add to what my colleague said. As for what I was doing before I became a media person, I was developing the software for the process automation. That was an intellectual product which was linked to real production. I would like to give you a small reference. When we recalculate our production quality per buying power, so from money into physical units, so we manufacture right now per capita as many industrial production as the United States, and even by 25% more than the China. That's the question about our technological and manufacturing lacking behind. Did I understand you right? So the crystal protectionism, so no, the import embargo led to a lot of import foreign investments. Yeah. So now I can. So you don't have anything to talk here about. We have also Italian companies willing to invest in us. They would like to open a joint venture. I can tell you about our experience. So any investments have the following target in order to get the margin and ROI. If you can get a certain margin on a certain territory, you will invest. And we talk about the investments into the production. So in order the country develop, we need people actually to do the high qualified work. Not everybody can do the scientific work. We really want some people to manufacture. They need to have some in technologies and equipment for it. But this is the governmental function to create a margin. We really want the investment capital to come here and to hope for the margin. For example, because in Russia we have a significant cost because we are like a Greenland. And the only way to create a margin are the subsidies, our direct or indirect. If there is an embargo, we have a big market. We all like cheese. We like Parmesan. So we impose the import embargo, and the people would like to buy Parmesan cheese, and in this case, you get the highest margin. And the open market brings us to the situation that we are not able to compensate our highest cost when the market is open. I can give you all the calculations. In any case, it is absolutely clear that the ruble devaluation brought us to the occasion that people became poorer and the value for our manpower became cheaper and energy became cheaper for a certain period of time. But we will increase the remuneration of our people, and the oil and gas companies, they count everything in dollars, so that's an interim situation. I think it's not a systematic solution. A systematic solution will be the equalizing of production conditions in a certain territory. And then when we equalize these conditions, and we would like to become a leader in aircraft manufacturing, and only the domestic market can give you an opportunity for guaranteed sales. Only the domestic market can certainly. So you also have the situation with the Sukhoi Superjet SSJ. It has a significant share of avionics made abroad. But who purchased the first aircraft? Who was actually led to buy this aircraft? What the MS-21 is gonna do in the future? Because now the custom duties actually are only 10%. Who's gonna buy this MS-21? And this is the Irkutsk or Komsomolsk on Amur. Who's gonna buy this MS-21 aircraft? First, we need the protective customs duties, then the development of the high-tech production, and then we can intensify this production. It can decrease the custom duties and compete with the imported goods. And with the cheese, it actually managed to work when the embargo first, and then we got the cheese making industry developed. Daria would like to add something, but we have very little time left. So everybody would like to make a very simple health check and give very simple advices, and I'm listening to you. I'd like to tell you the devil is in details. What is the protective function of the customs duty? You need to equalize the price, and why we're actually so under competitive. That's the devil in details. In different industries, the reason is there is a different. Sometimes the cost structure, sometimes the competitiveness is low. You cannot actually speak about everything in the same way, because even the WTO leaves the right of the countries to protect their own agricultural market, because there are different conditions, different natural conditions to be competitive, because some of the plants can grow better and worse in different territories. And this food safety is the top priority for every single country. There are also industry where there is a main problem with old equipment, and there are also others where the problem is pure regulatory thing. Japan, you used as a compare, it was developing after the World War II, and the customs duties were not really high, but the local currency rate was actually decreased as it was in China for a long time. So these countries used a very low yen exchange rate, and the Japanese economic wonder ended when Japan increased the yen exchange rate with the US pressure. As for the shoes, as far as I understand, the labor resources have a significant share in your cost structure. Yeah, because this is the labor-intensive industry, but with the current level of remuneration, we're not able to compete with Brazil or China, where this cost structure is lower. Who said and why your price is higher? because we have at least 6 months where we need to hit the plants, because when we talk about the real costs, so we need to look at every single industry. I don't really dispute with it, but the government doesn't fulfill this function, because the target of the government and the goal of the tariffs is actually to create at least equal conditions. And I would like to explain what I am talking about. We have competitive companies, and they are not competitive because of the some objective factors, because you need to hit within 6 months. But all the companies live in these conditions. And if you just imagine, if you worked in Brazil, would you be more competitive? Yes, we will be more competitive. So globally, you are competitive. Yes, we are. So your story is a separate one. We need support you, but there are also other companies which cannot be competitive at any conditions. These enterprises died long ago. As for the agriculture, because you talk for a long time, I'm not talking about the general things. We want, as far as I understood, that the government should set up the custom duties in order to equalize the global international price and the domestic price, and then even would come and say, I have so much cost and also get stolen, and let's make a 30% customs duties, not you. I actually asked you whether you could be competitive located in Brazil, and the reason why your price is higher, they are very individual, and we need to understand it. And that's why the whole world actually got rid of the protectionism, and now the protectionism is very targeted. We need to protect those industries which are supposed to grow. If it is a cheese making industry, we need actually to focus on cheese. If the problem is with the outdated equipment, we need to review the equipment, but we don't need to protect everyone. I would like to give you a small reference. It is actually not possible to say right now to which industry the protectionism can be useful, for which not. And the colleague reminded that the Russian agriculture has been actually not really was not considered as a living one. But on the other hand, we have a significant historical experience showing that all countries achieving now the maximum freedom of trade started with full protectionism, and only when they managed to develop dozens of different industries started requiring from the others to open their territories for their products, and to open their own territories in exchange. And I think this is a kind of the dialectic development of protectionism. When a country managed to protect its own economy at the growth phase, will keep protecting it while opening the boundaries of other countries. So the globalization, as we see it now, that is just the protectionism in progress. They just need to sell their products. I'm dreaming of a strong domestic market. We'd like to decrease our cost and also need the other markets to be open. I'm really dreaming of all the markets to be open. I really want Brexit to happen. They really would like to have 16 NATO armies, and I will also supply my cheese to them. Because when the Soviet Union opened the boundaries, we actually had a lot of products from the other countries. Actually, what was killing our agriculture, that was actually elementary things. When I was attending actually the school, I read it in my handbook of economics. we have a very hot discussion. So we haven't even started pouring each other with water. Our industrialists require more active position from the government in terms how they to support. And I'm reading an interview now. Maxim Medvedkov, and the head of the Department of Trade Negotiations at the Ministry of Economic Development, he knows the WTO topic very well. And he answers the question how our economy reacts on WTO entrance membership. He said, we haven't had within the last 2 or 3 years no industry whose those representatives came to us that they were feeling bad and that they needed to change something fundamentally. And with the current ruble exchange rate, there is an understanding that the current tariff protection level is enough. But you need to understand that Maxim Medvedev actually betrayed Russia and entered the WTO. Certainly, he needs to demonstrate that he was involved. What are you doing now? Are you blaming the Russian government? You know, the Ministry of Economic Development is the Ministry of selling Russia. You said when we were entering the WTO, so for example, the customs duties for shoes, Maxim Medvedev told us for the first time how this Protocol Act was signed, and actually everything what we discussed was not reflected in this particular minutes of meeting. Because we as manufacturers, we as Ralph Ringer, we are feeling good now. But if tomorrow we need to reduce our production by 10%, so the shareholders will be very good. If we need to increase, the shareholders will feel very good. If we close down the production, the shareholders will be fine. But this is going to be very bad for the country. And we, as the manufacturers, say, if you as a country would like to open 4 more factories here in the country, if you as a country would like to resolve the problem of small cities with these easy deployable shoe factories, we can do it. Otherwise, we can stay at the same level. We can declare every single year that we have the minus 3% of the GDP. I can give you a tool. If you want, you can use it. And if you want, you can keep talking. What we can improve the infrastructure and so on, and we can get the investments, and they can do the same what I propose to now, what the cheesemakers already did. I'd really give a damn of Maxim Medvedev think we are living in different worlds. I actually don't really want to ask him to give us higher customs duties. His task is actually to join the WTO. And who is actually responsible for to increase the GDP of the country? Who is responsible for it? I would like to add, I do my business to earn money. My company actually has a very clear goal, actually to provide a profit to the shareholders, and the profit size is in line with the risk size, and the government should do it for the people, not for me. It's because we pay taxes, and this is something what the government used to pay pensions. Because you are the scientist, you live on our taxes. We don't really you, and we also pay taxes. we also pay taxes because the economy is the source for a good life in a country, because the education, the medical level is also required. That is actually what we need to discuss. Now we have only one big source of money in this country. That's the export of oil and gas, and also the agriculture. The income from the agricultural products is higher than the gas export income during the last year. If the protective measures in the shoe business were greater, we would grow faster, and the taxes from us would be higher, and we can also use and employ those people from the low productive areas who are currently not really efficient or even working, and the price for the high quality shoes would be even higher. So my position is, so the economic growth can be created pretty fast with the protectionism. That is my personal position, and I have been talking, and I'm talking about it. Should I write to Maxim Medvedev? Why you don't write him? But because you are the moderator, you are not the speaker. You can also come to Maxim Medvedev. Because as far as I understand, so the level, there is a difference between the actual significant gap between the level of the custom duties and the binding customs duties are the 1,500 items. I would like to add, in 2013, I remember when the state Duma adopted this WTO joining, so probably the MPs got this stack of document just 7 days before they adopted. Probably they didn't even read, and when Russia joined the WTO, I took a call from my relative. Actually, I came to Moscow to protest against the government. That's how we actually were fighting against it. Okay, dear delegates and panelists, I have been shown that our time is going out, and the discussion is really hot, and it can even last very long. But the time is out, so we, in this case, we have to stop our discussion right now. If you still have a wish to continue this discussion, you can do it outside. Because we also have the contradictions in the approaches of our panelists. But I really would like to thank everyone who participated in this discussion. I do really hope those who participated in this discussion, it gave at least additional stuff to think about. Probably also helped you in which direction you should go, and this is probably at least a positive result. I would like to thank you once again. It was very interesting to listen to all of you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.